Hello, welcome, ladies and gentlemen of whatever gender you prefer. Welcome to episode number 3 of the B3 In-Depth series. My name is Johannes Grenzfurtner. I'm an artist and filmmaker. I founded an art collective called Monochrome some 30 odd years ago, and I've done lots of weird projects. One, for example, is here in the back, Robo Exotica. It's the festival for cocktail robotics. So we present machines that actually mix drinks for humans and other interesting things. But it's not so much that I want to talk about me today. No, we have a very special guest for episode number 3. A big applause for Chris Hülsbeck. Hello, welcome.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. As fine as you can do in COVID times, you know that, but that's an old story, I guess. In the meantime, I
got my first shot last week, so
I got mine 2
we're
days
getting
ago.
over it, hopefully.
Pfizer.
Excellent.
My second one is
I had
2 or 3
Moderna.
weeks. Good. How was the reaction? Did you have any immune response or
No,
something?
it was good. It was good so far. Just a little bit of achy arm.
Yeah, same was here because they injected directly into the muscle, so it's just like ouch. I couldn't sleep on this side for like 2 days or something like that. But good to hear that you're calling from Arizona. That it seems that Arizona is finally starting to vaccinate people.
Yeah, our new home here. After I spent almost 20 years in the San Francisco Bay Area, now I landed in Arizona, and my wife and I, we bought a piece of land here, which is a little photo in the background here.
So it's
And
something
we're
in
planning
between
to build
desert and
a
prairie.
house here. Yeah, it's high desert. And it's very serene, and it was good for quarantining during COVID.
I can see. I heard that you were actually not far from the border to Mexico.
We can see the border from here, from our land. Yeah.
So maybe we can even talk about that a little bit, about the whole rigmarole and the whole shenanigans we had the last 4 years concerning that border with your former president.
Yes. I'm not actually very politically active or opinionated. We're definitely. I think we're very happy where we are right now, in terms of where the direction is going.
Yeah, change of leadership, let's call it that
Yes.
way. Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump back, because some people might not even know who you are. Some people will be absolute fans of yours. So it's always hard to introduce a personality like yours to a broad audience. But you are a musician, you're a composer. You have been doing that for many years. And most people know you because you did lots of music compositions for computer games in the 1980s, or started in the 1980s. But I would actually like to go a little bit further back, because I was born in 1975. You were born in 1968. So there are only like 7 years of difference between the two of us. But still, I have the feeling that those 7 years are almost like ages, because what happened in those 7 years, given the hobbyist movement in computing technology, the personal computer movement, there are lifetimes between the 7 years difference that we have. And yeah, because I'm wearing a Tron hat with the NCOM logo. So Tron was one of the first films that I've seen in a cinema in 1982 when I was 7 years old. But my first computer, I think I played my first computer game when I was 8 or 9, so around 1984. But that was already a time when you were already pretty active. So could you tell us a little bit, how did you actually end up having a computer in your early days? And why did you start to becoming so active?
Right. So there were obviously like a lot of fascinating developments in the 80s when I was a teenager, and home computing and video games were a big part of that. I think the first time I played a video game was in 1977 or so at a county fair, and I was hooked on video games. And first I was playing the machines and putting a lot of coins in there, and then eventually I got like an Atari with the cartridges, that one of the first video game consoles that you could buy. And a few years later, my uncle got into computers, and so I got a little bit exposed to basic programming on a business machine. And I wanted my own computer, and I saved up some money for the Commodore 64. And at the same time, I was also very interested in music because my family was very musical. My grandma, my aunt, and my mom were all piano teachers. And so I had from an early age pianos in the house, and I became interested in electronic music. I listened on the radio to a show that was called Sounds from Synthesizer, and that was another fascination. But our family was not wealthy enough to buy me a studio or a synthesizer or something like that. It was just too expensive. So when the Commodore 64 was advertised, I read that it had a synthesizer sound chip, the legendary SID device. And that was, when I read about it, I thought like, okay, I can probably afford a Commodore 64 and make music with synthesizer music with that. And that was in a way for me to explore my composition stuff that I wanted to do. So.
Yeah, I think the first computer game I played was on the Commodore 64. I think it was Blue Max. I'm not really sure about that. I can't
Yes,
really
yes, I
remember.
remember that. Those
Yeah,
early days
and
fondly.
it was interesting because I got my first computer pretty late. We were a very technophile family. So my dad already had his first VCR in 1979 or 1980 or something like that. So my family, and my dad especially, classic baby boomer, invested all the money that he got into shiny gadgets, like 8 millimeter cameras, and pretty late for his drive to buy technology. We got a computer, I think in 87 or something like that, and it was already an IBM PC. It was an AT 286, and that was already a time when I was most of the time playing computer games at my friends' places, like Commodore 64s and Ataris and stuff like that. And it seems for me there was a big, let's say, divide between rather affordable computers like a Commodore 64 and more like the high-end machines that you would see like an IBM PC or something like that, stuff that was rather built for businesses. And I ended up getting one of those business machines and was super annoyed because there were no computer games for it. The games for the 64 were way better than the games for the PC, and it took a long time for that to take off. But what is your perspective on the diversity of computers and machines that existed in the 1980s? I mean, for people who are young nowadays, it's almost, I think, incomprehensible or unimaginable how many different things were out there, and they were completely incompatible with each other.
Yes. Yeah, in those early days, they served very different markets and purposes. Like the business machines, they had higher resolution, but often monochrome or very little color screens to serve the business purposes, and the home computers, they were more basic in terms of resolution, but they had more color, and they were definitely better suitable for video gaming. And I think that was the reason why that difference existed. And but yeah, I was actually, by the way, I was almost buying an Atari because I was a little bit short on my saved up money. And I really wanted the Commodore 64, but I almost bought an Atari because I couldn't wait any longer. But then my grandma chipped in and got me the Commodore 64. So that was lucky. I don't know where my career would have been if I had started out on the Atari 400 or 800 or one of those machines.
Yeah. So your grandma chipped in, and then you ended up doing chip tunes. I think that works very well.
That's actually funny. The English language works well there. Yeah.
Oh yes,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so you come from your family background was very musical, so there was piano playing all around. So was it? How did you start bringing your knowledge, your musical knowledge, like into the computing world?
Yeah, so as I said, the real dream was to make synthesizer sounds and synthesizer music. I was a big fan, of like Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and Jean-Michel Jarre and all those like early synthesizer pioneers. And I wanted to make. My dream was really like melodic. Instrumental type music on a synthesizer. So then I got the Commodore 64, and I realized pretty quick that nothing happens if you don't put a lot of work into it, because it's not like nowadays where you get a new computer, laptop, or whatever, and there's already so many great programs that you can use to make music and other artistic things. When you switch that Commodore 64 on, all you see is this blinking cursor, and you don't you have to program it yourself basically,
It's not
because
very
the
inviting.
programs that are out there, they're just not suitable for what I wanted to do. So I started out with basic programming, and that wasn't fast enough or good enough, so I started to learn the machine language assembly. And then I actually also, this was another dream of mine, was to actually create games, because I was a big gamer at the time, and so I wanted to also design my games. The music was a hobby at the time, and the games was maybe a career opportunity that I saw. But then I quickly realized that I wasn't that good designing games, or I was pretty decent at programming the computer on a low level, but I wasn't really, it just didn't come together. I did like 2 or 3 like little games that didn't go anywhere. But a friend of mine, he had already sold a game to a company, and he was working on a second one, and he wasn't good with sound and music. So we collaborated, and that was my first game music that I developed. Was a little game called Planet of War, and was like the simple space shooter. But he really liked the music that I came up with for that. And so that was definitely an entry. And then the big thing, a few months later, I won a contest in a German computer magazine for C64 music. Was the first kind of contest like that. And I just sent a piece in to, my hope was to appear on the cover disc under the first 10 selected pieces. But to my surprise, I actually won the contest. And that was really like the start of my career there.
So, and how did that work back then? So did companies producing computer games see you and your work in the C64 magazine and directly contact you about a job or something like that? How did that work?
I actually cold called numbers from the back of the magazine. There was a section where companies were advertising that they were looking for like graphic artists or programmers, stuff like that. And I just called up the first company that I found was Rainbow Arts. That was also like the big up and coming company in Germany doing video games. And I just called them up and talked to the boss. and said, "Hey, I won this contest. Maybe you could use some of my music in your games." And so that's how that started. I think to a large degree I was very, very lucky to be at the right place at the right time, because I think there were many other talented people out there probably, but they were maybe like not part of the contest, or they were a little bit early and they were still studying in school or something like that. I was just the first one to really contact that company and provide music for their games, and that was the yeah, magic recipe, I guess.
Those companies were German companies, or did you also kind of like war dial to the UK or something like that?
No, this was very segmented, and my English wasn't that good back then. So I wouldn't have dared to call an English company at the time. I was a little bit aware of the British game developer scene. I had heard of my direct competitors, Rob Hubbard and Martin Galway, who I also enjoyed their works. But I, at the time, I wouldn't have thought of even calling in England. I was just concentrating on what I could find in Germany, I think.
How
That would
did
be
the
different nowadays, probably.
yeah. But how did the computer gaming, I'm not even sure you can call it an industry back then, but how did the computer gaming business look like in Germany in the mid 80s, let's say?
Yeah, that was very undeveloped, I would say, or very grassroots. Yeah, not really that professional yet. There were probably many hobbyists that changed into creating games and make this into a career, but it wasn't like that. It was uh, a very playful first couple of years, I would say. Not like comparable to the corporate structures we have nowadays, and where it's very organized. And so we were all like very enthusiastic freaks doing our thing. And I remember also like in the first few years of working Rainbow Arts, there were many working through the nights and just doing it for fun, not necessarily for a paycheck.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The what do you think is the main thing that, because if we look at the computer gaming scene nowadays, or the computer gaming industry, it's just like incredibly big. I mean, it's bigger than Hollywood. It's like a billion dollar industry. Did you at some point expect that would happen, that computer gaming would be so big at some point in the future? Or were you thinking of like, well, I will live my life as a composer in a niche market forever? Or did you expect kind of like an explosion of that kind?
I mean, we realized that this would grow for sure, but I did not think that it would like surpass something like Hollywood. In fact, in the early days, I had also the dream to like use this as like a springboard jump off point, do video games for a few years, then maybe get into like pop music production. I still was dreaming of like building a large studio with all those big synthesizer machines that I was dreaming of, and things like that. And then it also morphed into like, oh, could I maybe branch out into TV and film music at some point? So we saw it growing, but we didn't expect it to become this big as it is nowadays. For sure, I'm always shocked how big this whole thing has become. And also like nowadays I feel a little bit I feel almost a little bit distanced from the games industry. I still work in it, of course, and I still do game projects, but the whole thing has changed. As you said, it's a billion-dollar industry, and it's very corporate. The big studios, they basically chew out their their talent. They come in young now, and they get worked hard the first few years, and then often people drop out of the industry because they can't take it anymore. It's a very competitive and grinding to do game development nowadays, with teams of like hundreds of people and these corporate structures and stuff like that. So it's very different than in those early days.
It's definitely different, yes. And sometimes I have the feeling that the companies nowadays, and you can't really compare what's going on now with what went on in the 70s and 80s, but sometimes I have the feeling that they kind of exploit this hacker ethos or hacker myth that you have to do your best and work through the night, like you explained before, and they make it part of their business models. They kind of like grind the people down, although it's not really necessary. It's just like it's nothing that people need to do. It's nothing that will help. It's just like part of the exploitative business model.
Yeah, and I don't think even that it is planned that way. This just happens because when you look at games nowadays, they are so gigantic, and the manpower that needs to go into a development of that sort just automatically either you have like game development that stretches over years or even decades, which is it just costs too much money to develop. So what you have ambitions, and you have young people who get into this business. They're ambitious, they want to make their mark, and they're seeing this as like their dream. They played games in their teens, and now they can work on a game. And but they are only part of a larger team, and then you have deadlines. And then what happens is, you have this ambition, and you want to make it bigger, but you still need to at some point sell the game. So you're coming up against budgets and deadlines, and that creates what we call in the industry crunch mode. And then you have to really you have to put in insane man hours to get it done, to just get it done, get it out the door. And that's why I think this is from the teams very much a young person's game or career, because you just as an older developer, you cannot keep up with that kind of pressure and craziness there.
Yeah, but that's a good point. So, as a kind of like computer gaming music veteran, what are you doing nowadays? So, how are you still kind of like doing the crunch work, or have you found other ways also of being creative, not only in that mode of the major computer gaming industry?
Right. So for a number of years, I've been freelance again now, and I have every year I have a number of game projects that I work on. Lately, though, I see the trend towards more indie projects, because the bigger AAA things, they go with younger talent that comes in with the teams. You have to also realize, because of that massive churn that's happening in the industry with younger teams coming in, they bring in their own friends, and it's very much still like a business where you rely on connections, personal connections. So when you come, and there's even schools out there for game development and art schools and all that, and they bring in their friends that they've gone to school with, and there's many talented people out there. So that's the one thing. And then when it comes to like AAA games, they often now go not necessarily by what the game needs in terms of music and sound, what is the best person for that. They often go with like who has the biggest name, in the industry, and then they now look even to Hollywood and hire like Hollywood composers. So my business is really more right now in the indie scene, where also like a few developers came up. They like my early work and they want that kind of vibe in their game, and then that works out much better. And the other thing is I also have been over the last few years working in some other areas that are kind of related. One thing is I'm building a Patreon project and following with my fans,
Could you
where I
explain what
create.
that is? Because some people
So
are
yeah,
probably not aware what Patreon is. Yes.
so Patreon is a crowdfunding platform. You probably heard of like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, which are for like larger projects where you collect a large sum to create something, either a product or a piece of art or music or something like that. But it's like a one-time thing, whereas Patreon is more like for smaller contributions by fans or patrons over time to support an artist or an endeavor or a podcast or whatever, to support and make those happen on an ongoing basis. So what I do there is I create right now at least one music piece a month, which is in a way very similar to my video game soundtracks. It's usually melodic and instrumental, and it's often made with synthesizers, but I also sometimes do tracks with orchestral elements or orchestra sounds. And I make all these pieces that I create, they're royalty free. And I've so far, so you can tell I've been at this for several years now, made over 50 music pieces, and they're all royalty free. So people who contribute to that project can actually use all of them, be it on YouTube or even in their games if they want to, and whatever it might be. Even commercial projects, the pieces are all royalty free to use for my patrons. And that has become a very fun and explorative and also like a rewarding experience for me. And it's also an important part of my income now.
And as far as I know, the people who donate, who have this like a Patreon subscription, so to speak, to your work, uh, most of the time those people are fans, and those people are
Mhm.
very interactive. I
Yes.
assume they write you and they have questions and they have ideas. So do you like, how does that work? Is this like a group process at a point?
Yes, so every month I also send out previews of what I'm working on, and we have discussions about, either naming the tracks or ideas of what to try. Maybe people say like, hey, why I would like to have like a remix of an old game music of yours or something. So we take that and discuss it, and so there's definitely a vibrant community around it also. For one example was for last Christmas, I had this idea of doing a 1 week experiment where I did 7 songs in 7 days. So I
Mhm.
composed one track of music a day and sent out the previews and everything. And then at the end of the month, I finished one and sent it out. And then recently, I released that album after I mixed it a little bit more. But yeah, so that was a nice experiment to come up with 7 different music tracks in 7 days.
But they were not Christmas themed.
No, they were like all over the place because I had to come up with one every day. So I just went with my gut.
Nice. Just let's take one example of those like 7 days of those seven music pieces.
Yeah.
Uh, because it's always I always like to talk about kind of like the nuts and bolts of that kind of stuff. So let's I can imagine you sitting there it's day number 5, I don't know, and you're saying that, oh my God, what, I have to make another song. So there is a certain pressure to it. So
It was, and
how does that work?
that
Do you
was
work good
actually
under pressure?
yes, that was actually part of the fun and part of the limitation to not mull every sound over 10 times and work on the melodies like for several days, which I often do with my other tracks. But just go and do it. Just do it. It was definitely kind of a race against time. And I remember on the third day, I think I had a little bit of trouble where it wouldn't. I started in the morning, and by early afternoon, it was going nowhere. And I actually started over. So I threw out what I had, and I started totally from scratch. And but I got it done, and so that was a little bit insane. A lot of those tracks from that album are definitely electronic in nature. I have one that has some orchestral elements in it and is more like cinematic. But one of the funnest one was actually the second day, where I created a piece where I dreamt a long time of trying something like that. I was a big fan of Italo disco in the 80s. Um, what is a good example?
So more
Like
like
there was one
like
piece,
the synth pop stuff. So more like Giorgio
yeah,
Moroder or
yeah, that kind of
stuff like
thing.
that.
Yes,
Okay. Yeah.
yes. I think one of the most prominent pieces, because it was a remake from an Italo disco track, was probably Laura Branigan, Self Control.
Uh-huh.
That was a big one. But in any case, so there's a certain style to that which I liked. It's very synthy driven. It's very melodic. So I found the right sounds, and I created in my opinion, authentic Italo disco track on day 2, and that was fun. And but otherwise, it's like a nice mixture. And it's after I finished the album, I was actually, it's only 7 pieces, but they flow very nice into each other. So it's a good experience to have to listen to the album in full. It's almost like
Sounds
a
great.
concept album.
Sounds great. I definitely have to
And
check that out
yeah, and
afterwards.
thanks to my fans to make this happen, because such a project would not easily be possible if I didn't have that um, tiny contribution from every fan there.
Yeah. I mean, I remember. I mean, it has ups and downs, and I'm not trying to kind of complain about Kickstarters and fans and stuff like that. But we did a Kickstarter for one of our projects at some point, and it was incredible. There were people donating, like $5 or something like that, and they were still pestering us with questions and things like 5 years later, because
Hmm.
I invested $5 and I demand my
Yeah,
access, so to speak. So it has the ups and downs of, I guess, the good and bad things that come with
yeah.
nerddom, I guess. Yeah.
It's a very good point, by the way. I actually also ran 4 successful Kickstarters. And the first one was actually very successful. It was a remake of one of my most prominent projects called Tarakan from the early 90s.
Mhm.
There was like a 2D jump and run, jump and gun action game. And it had a massive following, probably my best known work from my fans. And I wanted to create studio versions of all the tracks from the game on a 4 CD set. And it became, I think, the second, or it was in video game music, it was the most successful Kickstarter at the time. And it was just an insane adventure. And then the other Kickstarters, one was for a piano album, which was very cool, was a selection of my music. And then 2 Kickstarters we did for orchestra versions of the Tarakan music, which was
Oh,
also quite insane. So real live orchestra recordings, arrangements of the Tarakan music, and we recorded that in Sweden with a 80-piece orchestra, and that
Oh,
was
wow.
an
Wow.
absolute dream to make that happen. Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to ask you because as a composer working with an 80-person orchestra is something completely different than sitting at home and coding pretty much and trying to fit trying to use the least amount of space possible because you don't fit that stuff on a disk. So there is
Yeah.
this like enormous, let's call it challenge to compress things, to make things small, that were like a dominant thing in the 1980s, because people can probably remember how hard that was, even to use graphics, because it was like nothing was fitting on a stupid floppy disk. It was just like incredible what people did. And then a couple of years later, you're working with the exact opposite of like 80 people in a room playing your songs.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I was really, really lucky. We had a fantastic team. The producer was actually a longtime fan of mine, and he had all the connections. His name is Thomas Böker, and I remember him like sending me fan mail, and so like real letters, because it wasn't like email at the time, and I was actually not fond of writing letters. So, but he said he was back then. He was maybe like 14 years old, and said, "Oh, I'm your biggest fan." And I was like, "Oh, I get those letters all the time." But ultimately, maybe it turned out he was my biggest fan, or is, because he made these orchestra projects possible. And yeah, but it's also interesting that the music actually translated really well to orchestra arrangements. And we had like really great people working on that, making the arrangements and orchestrations. But you can still the melodies and everything is still perfectly preserved, even when the orchestra plays it. But of course, it's like, as you said, what a difference for going from 3 or 4 voices to like 80 people playing, top musicians playing the instrument with such everybody putting their love in. It's mind-boggling. I was each time I hear a piece of my music played like that, I get like tears in my eyes. This is indescribable, and I would have never thought that that would happen when I created those compositions 30 years ago.
I mean, so much changed in the last couple of decades. I mean, even concepts like, uh, floppy disks, CD-ROMs, all that stuff, it's all, like dead technology in the meantime. So much changed. And even concepts, like freeware and shareware and all that stuff. It's like stuff that I grew up. I, of course, know what shareware is, but I mean, it doesn't exist in that format any longer because the distribution methods are completely different and the scene
Yeah.
is completely different. Yeah. But
Now it's all
what
apps.
yeah, it's all apps. It's not they're not even calling it them programs anymore. It's just apps. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my, oh my. But one of the things that you mentioned before is really interesting. That the songs that you compose supported by your fan base on Patreon, that all those songs are royalty free. So what is your
Mhm.
stance on the whole debate about copyright, copyleft, Creative Commons, public domain, all that stuff, because there seems to be this culture war going on between people obviously very much interested and fighting for the rights, the copyright, and some people do completely different approaches, try different approaches. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that I probably have a lot of opinion about that, because the way I grew up was, in the early days of video games, we didn't even like think about copyrights. I remember even early in my career, I would like do cover versions of some, commercial recordings and put them out on the Commodore 64 and things like that. And so I always had like, I mean, that I I know that copyright needs to exist because you need to, as an artist, you need to be protected from certain exploitation. But I think you also need to go with the change of technology over time. And for example, like when the whole MP3 thing came up and Napster and all those things, um, I had a very different opinion than probably a lot of other musicians. If you heard like these super wealthy musicians who made like hundreds of millions, like Metallica riffing on the copy culture and, stealing music and all that stuff. And I was thinking like, you get this all wrong, this is actually an opportunity. And I actually could see when then Apple introduced the iTunes store, I said this is actually what needed to happen. And I said like Napster and all those things only exist because you're not making it easy for people to actually buy the music from the artists that they like. I mean, sure, Napster was a little bit iffy, but I certainly didn't like the idea of like downloading some shady MP3 from some server that might be corrupted, or you get infected with spyware or whatever. So I wanted something legitimate that's affordable, but that shakes up the industry, because I also tried to like break into the regular music industry for so many years, and it's really like it was a very closed system. So as an indie musician or an independent artist, you had really no way of like really breaking in there and making your mark. And so when iTunes came along, I actually founded a music label with a friend just to be able to get my music on iTunes. And I didn't even care about Napster and the whole MP3 thing, because I knew that if I put it out there on the iTunes store, and back then you couldn't get into the iTunes store if you weren't at least a label, that my fans would support that and buy that, because then it's like it becomes actually cheaper than buying CDs and all that stuff. And it's like what they wanted. They wanted it portable. They wanted it on their iPods and stuff like that. So I got it on there, and lo and behold, within a few years, I was making basically a decent income from that iTunes. And then it opened up. It exploded at some point, because we were already in the digital distribution, and now it's everywhere. With like Spotify, of course, is the biggest thing. And I also hear now some old-time artists complaining about the low royalties that Spotify pays. But you have to remember also that, for example, US radio, where the whole thing came from with MP3 and all that stuff, they didn't pay any royalties. Many people don't know that, but US radio was always subsidized by the music industry, and they didn't have something like the GEMA in Germany. They never paid royalties for playing music on the radio. They saw this as like a promotional platform for the big labels, for them to sell their records. And so it actually opened up the possibilities for artists nowadays to make a mark. And it's not just Spotify. If you want to, as an indie artist nowadays, want to make more money off your work, you go on Bandcamp, for example, which is totally independent, and it pays out 90% of what the fan pays to Bandcamp for an album gets paid out to the artist, and you can set your own price. And it all depends on your following and your fans to support that. So,
and there's certain interesting like mechanisms, let's call it like that. Some bands that I know, they pretty much release their stuff on YouTube because they know so many people use YouTube in that way. I mean, YouTube was never meant to be a music streaming platform, but the quality is good enough for those people. Just like, yeah, just like more people will see it if I put it on YouTube, and it's not even a music platform. Yeah.
I actually have one fan that wrote me. He started a synthwave channel on YouTube just 4 years ago or something, and he has now over 1 million subscribers. And obviously that makes now when he releases music and supporting other indie artists to put out their music, that generates quite a bit of advertisement revenue for them. So it's definitely democratized in a way the music making individuals who want to get their stuff out there and heard.
Yeah. So you don't really have, as far as it seems from what you've been telling me, that you don't have a problem with the big gatekeepers, so to speak, with Spotify and Apple, Google, because I mean, they are the ones that kind of like dictate how music distribution goes now.
Yeah, but that has always been like that. I mean, think about back in the 70s and 80s, those labels, you know, this was a very, very closed market where you had to like work your butt off for years or have really like incredible talent to break in there. And then usually you heard all the stories of like young artists coming up and being exploited by their labels, and they fought for years to get out of those contracts and stuff like that. So but on the other hand, they also once they got up into that small group of established artists, they also made like an incredible amount of money because it was I mean, you remember how albums cost like for adjusted for inflation, you would pay like $30 for a music album, and then you had like 2 songs that were good and the rest are fillers, you know, that whole thing. So and in the end, the labels, I mean, if you're like a top artist, they would maybe pay you 5% of what the whole pie was that was coming in, because the record store would earn money, the distributor would earn money, the label would earn money. They would like shave off money for advertisement and all that stuff. And in the end, what ended up by the artist, I would argue, might be similar to what ends up when I put my music out on Spotify nowadays. Because I'm my own label, I get at least 100% of what comes in after my distribution company takes their 15% or whatever. But if like let's say Metallica or whatever, they have their old label deal intact still, and they earn their 5% of what they make according from their label from what comes in from streaming, then of course it's like a pittance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I
And
was always
streaming is also
hoping.
something. Yeah, another thing is that fans listen to the stuff over and over. So you cannot say, okay, the stream only brings in like a cent or half a cent of revenue, but that fan might listen to that same piece of music 20 times, and all of a sudden it's like more than what they would pay on iTunes. You know, so it's like it's all relative.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see how the whole thing developed, because I was expecting, so when I was kind of like a young punk in the early 90s or something like that, and I was very technophile, I was expecting that the internet would radically change how we work creatively and how we deal with arts and music, etc. And definitely it happened, because I mean, like, a world without the internet is impossible to think right now. But it is strange that I have to admit to myself that the basic structures, the basic power relations just like remained the same pretty much, just like the company names and the distribution methods changed. But in the same way, the whole thing, an artist might be happy to get 5% of a piece of art or a piece of music or whatever, is kind of like that seems to be the constant with or without the internet.
But the opportunities are there, and this is something that's exciting. If you're a young and upcoming artist, sure, you might still need to invest a few years, but you have really ways to get your music out there in different distribution avenues that didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
So
And it's
that
new
is a good thing.
forms of creativity and new forms of output that didn't even
Yeah,
exist before, because just like it's pretty much no problem nowadays to have a collaborative music project with someone living in Japan. You can do it. I mean, when that would
exactly.
not have been possible 40 years ago. How is your creative process? Are you usually working by yourself, or do you also like to collaborate with people, with other musicians?
Yeah, I do collaborate. As I mentioned, the orchestral albums, for example, that was a big collaboration with arrangers and orchestrators. I also work on game projects with other musicians to spread the workload. And then I have actually, like you mentioned, Japan. I have a bunch of studio musicians over the different parts of the world where I collaborate, and then we send files back and forth, and they play their instruments, and then I reincorporate those into my tracks. So that is definitely also something that wasn't possible like that before. That is a wonderful development.
Absolutely. Have you ever been working, because a big part of the B3 biennial is also like the moving image, and uh, uh, so that means like not only regular classic films, but also VR films and new forms of 360-degree films and stuff like that. New forms emerging, emerging forms of moving images. Uh, have you been working in the film industry as well?
Not really. I mean, I did here and there a few like small short film projects, but they were very amateur level, I would
Mm.
say, and really just more like for fun projects to kind of like get my feet wet and try that out. And I do enjoy it. I say always like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if one of my fans and supporters became like a film director and would hire me for making music for their feature film. That would be amazing. And there has been for a few years now development where there's a documentary in work in progress in Germany. I don't know exactly where the project stands, but I'm still hoping that comes together where they want to do like documentary about the German video game industry or business, and that I would make music for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it I think I've been waiting for that documentary for a long time, because so many interesting things happened and grew out of Germany that are internationally famous now, or wrote like certain parts of history in the computer gaming field, but people don't know it or don't know about it.
Right.
Yeah, just like some people know about it because it's not nostalgic for them, but some youngsters don't even know that X happened in Y, and that shaped the whole industry. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It would be interesting. I think it will happen at some point.
Great. So, well, I would like, if you have further information that you would like us to share with our viewers, that we could put down in the in the YouTube channel, in the documentation, and all that stuff, it would be great if you could provide us with some links. That would be very nice.
Hmm. I'll
But
do that.
let's have one last question for you, uh, because it's a question that I really like. It's a challenging question. Yeah, it's is there one thing? Let's rephrase it. What do you think is the most controversial thing that you believe in?
The most controversial thing that I believe in. Ooh, I don't know. That is
It's a
like that's
it's a hard question. I know it's a hard.
yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't really have a lot of controversial things. Maybe the only thing I think I touched on that was the whole MP3 Napster Spotify drama that has been going on. I think that my view there is that quit all the whining and
Mhm.
use the opportunities that are out there instead of like complaining that Spotify pays too little.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
But I
that
completely agree with you.
that
And
would be
yeah,
that would maybe be my most controversial view.
but I mean, for some people, that is super, super controversial because, like,
Yeah.
sometimes even like there are some people out there who do creative work. You can't even mention Creative Commons to them, and they freak out.
Hmm.
And Creative Commons is only kind of like a bug fix for kind of
Yeah.
like dysfunctional copyright system that needs reform anyways. But so I
Yeah.
liked
Yeah.
it a lot. But I mean, but going back to Napster, I remember back then that was kind of like eye-opening for me because for me, and I think in certain ways that changed anyways because of Napster, but for me, Napster was a database of human culture that I did not have access to until Napster arrived. So, for example, just like a
Hmm.
simple story from my personal life is I'm a big fan of War Games, the film from the early 1980s, kind of classic nerd movie. And I
Yeah.
always wanted the soundtrack for War Games. They published it on an LP, but they didn't really republish it. So there was no way getting your hands on the War Game soundtrack in the mid or end 1990s, and there was no plan to reissue it. And I was just like super desperate because I just wanted to listen to the music. And the
Hmm.
first day Napster came out and I was aware of it and I went on Napster, the first thing I looked for was War Games, the soundtrack. And of course, it was there and I downloaded it and enjoyed it. And a couple of years later, they released it as kind of like a CD or something like that. And then I bought it. But for me, that was in essence what Napster was about, that people want access to creative stuff. But there are certain
Hmm.
gatekeepers, for whatever reason, who block that access.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Absolutely. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
So now we didn't talk about Trump at all. Maybe that's even a good thing.
Yeah, no, we don't need to talk about that.
No,
We'll
no,
we'll
not at
we'll
all.
we'll just pretend that never happened.
It never happened. There was a glitch in the matrix,
Glitch in
and
the
now,
matrix,
yeah,
exactly.
let's see if the other glitches are better that are coming up, but we'll see. So thank you so much. I hope you will enjoy the rest of your day. My day is almost over. Your day is just beginning in southern Arizona. Uh,
Yes.
and enjoy your good life as a non-retro composer in the year 2021.
Yeah,
It
I
was
actually
great having you.
recently I did a little bit of C64 music again for a fan project. It wasn't anything commercial, but that was fun, and it was a collaboration, so I didn't have to go into the hexadecimal numbers crunching again. But I did this composition, and then I had somebody help me to uh, transfer to the Commodore 64 and that kind of stuff. So that has been fun. Those things are just like the best times when it's just for fun and not
Yeah,
um, you know
yeah, of course. When you don't feel the boot
that
of
pressure.
necessity, the pressure. Absolutely,
Exactly.
absolutely. But I have to say, like, I did a lot of assembly code programming when I was like 14, 15, something like that. I'm glad I don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is I started assembly code programming because at some point, but only for 2 or 3 months, I got super interested in virus coding. In the meantime, now
Mm.
I can talk about it because it's so many years ago that I
Mhm.
dabbled around in coding viruses for the MS DOS back then. But of course, that only worked with assembly code because we were like machine code. But I'm glad I don't have to do all that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much. It was great having you. We will keep all our fans updated about your projects as well. So in case people ask us, we will either direct them over to you, or we will update our website with new information about your up-to-date work. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Johannes. That was really fun. Thank you so much.
I'd like to hug
See
you
you.
like a like a vaccinated non-corona hug,
Yes.
but it's too far away.
Yeah. Maybe we'll get the chance in a few years at one of the trade shows.
Absolutely, we'll do that. Hey, folks, and dear ladies and gentlemen of whatever gender you prefer, that was another episode of B3 In Depth. If you want to see future episodes, please subscribe somewhere down here. I hope to see you in the future, and I hope you join the debate. Thanks.